really follow it. Okay, hello. How can I follow that? That was amazing. So yes, I'm Maria, and I'm head of Theatre for Community and Education at Mountview. Mountview is a drama school just around the corner, and I'm here today with 3 of my MA students right there. So thank you for having us here today and for sharing these beautiful, complex, poetic films with us that you've clearly been working on for a long time. It's really inspiring to see. And I want to begin just by asking the room a question I ask myself a lot, a question that you've clearly been asking yourself. What are the stories you want to tell? I'd like us to take a moment to imagine the world without storytellers. What would that look like? A world where nobody writes stories, nobody tells stories, nobody ever even makes up a story. No one creates films, no one does theatre, nobody writes a book. No made-up, make-believe, upside-down story. I think it's quite hard to actually imagine this kind of world, because maybe a world without stories cannot exist. The poet Muriel Rukeyser wrote, "The universe is made up of stories, not atoms." So humans have always told stories in all sorts of ways, from drawings to bedtime stories, community rituals, to blockbuster films. Stories shape how we see ourselves and how we move through the world. The civil rights activist Maya Angelou once said, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. If we don't tell stories, we get sick." We need stories and we need storytellers, just like you. I want to tell an old story today, a true story that happened quite a long time ago. And I tell this story not because it's a happy story, it's not. I tell it because I think it helps us to understand our present a bit better, particularly around the subject of racism, and hopefully it really speaks to that last film in particular. The story begins in 1492, when a group of Europeans, led by a man named Christopher Columbus, set off on a quest for Asia. They ended up arriving in a place we now know today as the Americas, North, Central, and South America. So 1492 is widely known as the date where the Americas were discovered. But of course, there were already many people living there. In fact, it's estimated that there were between 60 and 100 million people there already. And these new arrivals, Columbus and his crew, thought they were in India, so they called these people Indians. The European arrivals invented particular racial categories to label these people that they had never seen before. And these categories were used to justify these people as inferior, not quite fully human. And these categories justified land, rights, and power going exclusively to the colonizers. During this time, approximately 95% of the indigenous population, the people they called the Indians, were killed, either by direct violence or from diseases the colonizers brought with them. This period of history is known by indigenous peoples as a Pachacuti, meaning a total disruption of time and space, or the world upside down. It's also known as the colonial encounter. And now, even though this happened a long time ago, it continues to shape our systems and structures today. For example, while many of the countries today many formerly colonized countries have now decolonized, which means they're no longer ruled by foreign powers, the inequalities created through colonialism still exist, as we can see through these films. The people living in the Americas were racialized in a certain way. They were labeled a different race, so this difference could benefit those who wanted to take control of their lands. So by looking at this story, we can understand how race is constructed, and we can begin to see that racism is not only an issue of prejudice, it's actually a global system of oppression. So why is that important? Because it allows us to go a bit deeper with this conversation. So not only talking about discrimination, but also looking at the ways racism is tied to exploitation. And of course, seeing race as a system of power and a social construction helps us to find ways not to reproduce its violence. To really understand racism, we need to look at how it connects to colonialism, to patriarchy, and our global economic system. So looking at structural racism helps us to understand why some people are allowed to cross borders between countries freely and others are not, why some countries are rich and some are poor, and why some governments and corporations have excessive power over the rest of the world. So that all sounds like quite a lot. And what has this got to do with storytellers? The political activist Angela Davis says, you have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. So of course, that's where stories come in. We can use stories to imagine absolutely anything. We can invent the world we'd like to live in. We can reveal the world that maybe we already live in, but we would like to see more of. It's only by activating our imaginations that we are able to see our own true potential. And so that's what you've all been doing today, using films to tell stories that provoke us, that make us think, make us uncomfortable, make us laugh, stories that make us realize our own potential as living, loving human beings. And the act of sharing stories reminds us that we're all connected. If someone's hurting on the other side of the world, that affects me over here. Storytelling can inspire solidarity. And there is so much to celebrate in our world, and so many people we can learn from whose voices and ways of thinking have perhaps been sidelined, who we as storytellers might want to focus on. In the face of the pandemic, we saw huge acts of solidarity, with mutual aid groups popping up all over the place, neighbors supporting neighbors and protecting our most vulnerable people. Black Lives Matter marches took place on a scale that has never been seen before. Very recently, we saw a huge act of solidarity for refugees and asylum seekers in Glasgow when 2 men detained by UK immigration enforcement were released back into their community after a day of protesting. And the fact that 200,000 people marched in London last weekend for the Palestinian people, for their right to life and to exist freely and peacefully, is a huge victory for anti-racist and anti-colonial movements around the world. The author Clarissa Pinkola Estes wrote, "One of the most calming and powerful actions you can do to intervene in a stormy world is to stand up and show your soul. Soul on deck shines like gold in dark times. The light of the soul throws sparks, can send up flares, build signal fires, cause proper matters to catch fire. To display the lantern of soul in shadowy times like these, to be fierce and to show mercy towards others, both are acts of immense bravery and greatest necessity. Struggling souls catch light from other souls who are fully lit and willing to show it. If you would help to calm the tumult, this is one of the strongest things you can do. When a great ship is in harbor and moored, it is safe, there can be no doubt. But that is not what great ships were built for." So I'll end by returning to the question, what are the stories you want to tell? Thank you.